I was married for 44 years and I was lonelier than I have ever been in my life. Not because she was cruel, not because we fought, because we stopped saying real things to each other somewhere around 1991 and never started again. My wife died in 2021, and the part I can't get out of my head is this. After she died, the house felt the same. The specific silence, that managed, comfortable, well-organized silence, was exactly the same as when she was alive. That's when I understood what I'd built. I'm 77, and I need to tell you the 3 ways a long marriage makes you lonelier than being alone. Because the third one is the one nobody sees until it's too late to do anything about it. I was lonelier inside my marriage than I have ever been alone. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that's a dramatic thing to say, that I'm overstating it, that lonely is what happens to people who have no one. And I had someone for 44 years. I had someone, that's exactly right. I had someone in the house, someone at the table, someone whose breathing I could hear at night if I woke up at 3 in the morning. I had a wife. Her name was Elaine, and she died of a stroke in March of 2021. And in the weeks after she died, I kept waiting to feel the loneliness that everyone told me was coming. The silence, the absence, the weight of an empty house. What I felt instead was something much more difficult. I felt the same. Not because I didn't love her, not because I wasn't grieving. I was grieving. I am grieving right now, 3 years later, in ways I don't always have language for. But the specific texture of my daily life, the particular quality of silence in that house, the sense of existing alongside someone without being reached by them or reaching them, that didn't change when Elaine died. Because it had been there for years. It had been there so long I had stopped noticing it was strange. That's what I want to talk to you about. That's the brutal truth I need to tell you, because nobody told me, and I spent 4 decades mistaking a managed life for a full one. You can be married for 44 years and still be alone. You can share a bed, share a name, share a mortgage and a kitchen, and a dog and a grandchild, and a corner table at the same restaurant every anniversary, and be as fundamentally unreached as you were at 22, the night before you met the person you were going to spend your life with. I know this because I lived it, and because I almost missed knowing I had lived it. Elaine and I were married on June 3rd, 1979. It rained in the morning and cleared by noon, the kind of day that feels like a small gift. We got married in a garden at her parents' house in Connecticut. 40 people, folding chairs on the grass, her mother's roses. During the ceremony, I said something during the vows, not the written ones, something I added, and Elaine laughed. Not politely. She laughed the way she laughed when something genuinely caught her off guard, with her whole face, and the officiant had to stop and wait. And everyone in those 40 chairs smiled, and I thought, I'm going to be with this person forever. I meant it. I wasn't performing it. I meant it the way you mean something when you're 31, and the future feels like something you're going to build together rather than something that's happening to you. The early years were good, real. We had Claire, our daughter, in 1982. We had the house in New Haven, then the house in Guilford after I moved to a larger firm. We had dinner parties that went until midnight and drives on Sunday mornings when Claire was small and sleeping in the back seat and we could talk. Actually talk. Unscheduled, the way you talk when you're not performing your marriage, but just inside it. We disagreed about things and said so. We surprised each other occasionally. There was a trip to Portugal in 1988. We had left Claire with my mother for a week, where I remember thinking that I liked Elaine, in addition to everything else. That I would have chosen her as a friend if I'd met her some other way. I want you to hold that image. Portugal, 1988. 2 people in a rented car on a coastal road talking. I want you to hold it because I am about to show you how something that real becomes Through no single decision and no single failure, a Sunday morning in 2014 where two people sit in the same kitchen with their coffee cups and their separate reading material and nothing between them but managed silence. The first distance I can identify was small. So small I didn't name it at the time. It was 1991. I'd been passed over for a partnership, the second time, and I came home knowing I needed to talk about it. Not to be fixed, just to say it out loud to someone who knew me and have them receive it. That was all. That is a simple and normal thing for a person to need. I sat down at the kitchen table and Elaine was making dinner, and I started to tell her, and she listened. She was listening. I don't want to misrepresent this, but there was something in the quality of her attention that wasn't quite landing on me. She was asking the right questions. She said the right things. And I found myself, halfway through the conversation, editing it, making it smaller than it was, summarizing instead of actually saying it. I don't know why. I don't think I could have explained it then. Something about the way the room felt, the dinner being made, the television on in the other room, the efficiency of the exchange, made me feel like what I actually needed to say was too large for the available space. So I took it and made it fit. I said it was disappointing, but I'd be fine. She said she was sorry. We had dinner. It wasn't a fight. Nothing happened. But I had made a decision in that kitchen without knowing I'd made one. I had decided that a certain kind of truth was too much to bring in here. And that decision, made once in 1991, would become, over the following years, the shape of my life. The second time was easier. The third time I didn't even think about it. By the time we were in our 50s, I had edited so much of myself out of my marriage that I was living in it like a guest who has been there long enough to know where everything is but never quite unpacked. Marty is my brother-in-law, Elaine's older brother. He divorced his first wife, Sandra, in 1999, after 18 years of marriage. I remember that year clearly. The family treated it as a catastrophe. Elaine's mother said things about commitment that she would never have said directly to Marty's face. There were Thanksgiving dinners where the seating arrangement was rearranged to minimize awkwardness. People talked about Sandra the way people talk about weather, as a force that had happened to the family, not as a person who might have had her own reasons. I was part of that. I was not cruel about it, but I was certain, in the way you're certain when you're 51 and your marriage is still intact and someone else's isn't, that Marty had failed at something I was succeeding at. Marty is 73 now. He lives with a woman named Helen in a house in Vermont that they renovated themselves over 2 summers. He calls his kids back the same day. He laughs in the particular way of someone who isn't managing anything, who doesn't have anything loaded and waiting that has to be kept from the room. Last summer, he came through New Haven on a drive, and we had dinner, just the two of us. And by the end of it, I realized he had asked me more questions about my life in 2 hours than I had been asked in the previous 2 years combined. I used to think Marty gave up. I understand now that he left a room where nothing real was being said, because he still believed real things could be said. That's not giving up. That's the opposite. Here is the first thing nobody tells you about loneliness inside a marriage. It wears the costume of its opposite. When you are lonely in a marriage, you are not sitting in an empty apartment at midnight with no one to call. You are sitting at a full dinner table with someone across from you who knows your middle name and your social security number and what you order at every restaurant you've been to together for 30 years. You have evidence everywhere you look that you are not alone. The joint checking account, the shared calendar, the photo on the desk, the car you bought together, which she always said was the wrong color and turned out to be the right color. The evidence is overwhelming. And so when the loneliness comes, and it does come, it comes every day, in the specific texture of a conversation that never quite arrives, in the particular quality of an evening that passes without a single thing that matters being said. You don't recognize it for what it is. You call it something else. You call it, this is what long marriages are like. You call it, We're comfortable with each other. That's a good thing. You call it, we've run out of new things to say. Of course we have. We've been talking for 40 years. You call it everything except what it is. What it is, you are in the same room as another human being, and you are not reaching them, and they are not reaching you, and neither of you has acknowledged this out loud in so long that you've both forgotten there was something to acknowledge. That is the first mechanism, presence masquerading as connection. You share a life. You do not, for stretches of years, actually meet. The second mechanism is one specific conversation, or rather, one specific moment where the conversation was possible and you closed the door. It was 2009. Claire had just moved to Seattle for a job, which was wonderful for Claire and left the house in Guilford quieter than it had ever been. Elaine and I were in our mid-50s. We had been married for 30 years. We were, by every external measure, a successful couple. House, health, retirement savings on track, a daughter we were proud of. There was nothing wrong, in the sense that nothing visible was wrong. One evening in November, Elaine was washing the dishes and I was reading at the kitchen table, and she said, without turning around from the sink, "Are you happy?" Not, "Are you happy about something specific?" Just, "Are you happy?" 3 words. The kind of question you can only ask someone you've known for 30 years. Someone you can ask without having to explain what you mean because they already know what you mean. I said, "Sure," without looking up from the newspaper. She didn't say anything else. She finished the dishes and dried her hands, and we watched television and went to bed. And that was the conversation. That was all of it. I have thought about that moment more than I have thought about almost any other moment in my life. Because I wasn't lying, exactly. I wasn't aware of being unhappy in any acute sense. But I also wasn't answering her. I was producing a sound that foreclosed the question. Sure is what you say when you don't want to find out what the answer is. Sure is what you say when the truth is too uncertain to bring into the room without risk, and you have spent years training yourself not to take that risk. She asked me the most important question a person can ask inside a marriage, the one that opens into everything, the one that if you answer honestly can change the whole shape of the following years, and I closed it in 3 letters without looking up. She never asked again. I don't blame her. You ask someone, "Are you happy?" and they say, "Sure," without putting down the newspaper. You learn something. You learn where that door is, and you don't try it again. The cost of that moment didn't arrive immediately. It arrived slowly, over the following years, in the particular silence of 2 people who have both stopped asking the question, and both, separately, stopped expecting it to be asked. The third mechanism is what our conversations had become by the time we were in our 60s. I want to be accurate about this because I'm not describing hostility. There was no hostility. Elaine was not difficult to live with. I was not difficult to live with. We were, in fact, unusually easy to live with, smooth, accommodating, efficient. That is the problem I am trying to describe. By 2013, 2014, the vast majority of what passed between us in a given day was logistical. When is your doctor's appointment? Did you call the insurance company? Claire is coming in August. Should we do the beach house again? What do you want for dinner? There was nothing wrong with any of these sentences. They were all necessary sentences, but they were all that was left. Not because we'd fought, not because something had broken, because we had both, separately and silently, retreated to the parts of the marriage that didn't require us to bring anything real. The logistics worked. The logistics were manageable and predictable and didn't ask anything of us. So we lived there, in the logistics, for years. I remember a Sunday in 2014. We were both at the kitchen table in the morning. Coffee cups, separate reading material, the window behind Elaine with the light coming in the way it does in October when the leaves have started turning. The room was warm. The room was, by every measure, comfortable. We were there for 45 minutes, and I do not believe we spoke more than 3 sentences that weren't about the logistics of the upcoming week. 2 people in the same warm room as alone as I have ever been in my life. I picked up my coffee cup and I noticed the ring it left on the table. Elaine always used coasters, but that morning she hadn't, and there was a ring on the wood. I looked at it and I thought, I should say something. Not about the ring, about the room, about the 45 minutes of silence, about the question she'd asked in 2009 that I'd closed without answering. I picked up my cup and I went to get more coffee and I said nothing. Marty came to Elaine's funeral in March of 2021. He drove 4 hours from Vermont with Helen. He was the first person to arrive at the house afterward. He sat with me in the kitchen for 2 hours, not filling the silence with the things people say at funerals, not managing the room, just sitting with me in the specific way of someone who isn't afraid of what's actually there. He asked me at some point what I missed most. I sat with the question for a while, and what I said was, I miss what we didn't have. He didn't flinch at that. He didn't tell me not to think that way or that I was being too hard on myself. He just nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone has said something you recognize. He'd been through his own version of it before he left. He knew what the room felt like from the inside, what I lost internally. And this is the thing that doesn't show up on the outside. The cost that nobody who looked at us from the outside would have been able to see was the expectation of being known. That slow erosion of the belief that someone on the other side of your life is actually interested in what's inside it, that they'd want to know, that they'd make space for the answer if you gave them one. I stopped expecting that somewhere in my 50s, and without that expectation, I stopped offering. And without the offering, there was nothing to receive. And what was left was a functional, orderly, externally successful marriage that had, somewhere under the surface, been empty for a long time. The ring on the table. After Elaine died, I stopped wiping it up. I let it sit there, that ring from her coffee cup, on the wood, where she hadn't used a coaster. I didn't want to wipe it up. It was the closest thing to her presence I had left. And the terrible thing, the thing I've had to sit with, is that toward the end, in those last years, it wasn't so different from what we had in life. Her presence, her absence, the ring, the managed silence. I spent 44 years in the same house as Elaine, and I didn't know how to reach her, and I didn't make myself try hard enough. And now there is a ring on the kitchen table. And I would give everything I have left to go back and answer her question honestly. Sure is not an answer. Sure is a door closing. Here's the brutal truth I've been building toward. The loneliness I'm describing, the kind that lives inside a marriage, that wears the costume of comfort, that makes two people into strangers who share a last name, is not an accident. It isn't something that happens to you. It is something you build, slowly, out of the small decisions you make every day about what to bring into the room and what to leave outside it. I built mine over 30 years, one closed door at a time. Sure, I'm fine, we're fine, it's nothing. Every one of those answers was a choice. I didn't experience them as choices at the time. They felt like the path of least resistance, the reasonable thing, the way you protect a marriage from the friction that comes with telling the truth. But protection is the wrong word for what I was doing. You don't protect a marriage by removing everything that could create friction. You starve it. And what I had by 2014, by 2018, by the last years before the stroke, was a starved thing. Still standing, still functional, still sending Christmas cards and booking anniversaries and going to Claire's kids' birthday parties together, but starved. And the hardest part of knowing this, the part I have to live with now, is that I could see it. Not clearly, not all at once, but the shape of it was visible to me if I had looked. I chose not to look, because looking would have required me to do something with what I saw, and doing something would have been harder than the continued management of the distance. That is the choice. That is always the choice. Not between a good marriage and a bad one, between a real one and a managed one. And managed is comfortable. Managed is easy. Managed will get you to your 70s with no visible damage and a coffee ring on the kitchen table that you're afraid to wipe up. I know what your Sunday mornings look like. Two people, coffee cups, separate things to read or separate screens. The room warm. Nothing wrong, technically. You would not describe it as unhappy. If someone asked, you would say, the way I said in November of 2009 without looking up, "Sure, we're fine." And maybe you are. Maybe what you have is actual peace, the kind that comes from two people who know each other deeply and have built something real and are comfortable with each other in the way that requires years to build. That exists. I don't want to tell you it doesn't exist. But some of you, and you already know which ones you are not at peace. You are at managed distance. You are in the same room as a person you once chose, and you are not reaching them, and they are not reaching you. And neither of you has said anything out loud about it in long enough that you've both started to think of it as normal. I need you to ask yourself one question, not about your marriage, about the last 6 months. When did you last say something true, not a complaint about logistics, not a reasonable opinion about something external, but something true about what's actually happening inside you, to the person you're with? When did you last tell them something that cost you something to say? Something that made the room a little harder for a few minutes because it was real. If you can remember the last time, do it again this week. Not in a month, this week. If you can't remember, that's your answer. That's the thing I didn't face until it was too late to face it with Elaine still alive. You're being handed the thing I wasn't handed. Time. You still have time to choose the room you're in, to decide that the comfort of the managed distance isn't worth the cost, and the cost is being known, and being known is the only thing that makes two people a marriage rather than two people in a house. Say the true thing, not everything at once. Not a confession, not a confrontation, not a scene. Just one sentence. One honest sentence about how you're actually doing, what you're actually afraid of, what you've actually been thinking about at 3 in the morning when the managed silence is the only thing around you. Put down whatever you're reading. Put down the phone. Look at the person across from you, the person whose breathing you can hear at night, whose coffee cup leaves a ring on the table, and say something real. That is the only thing I know how to tell you, because it's the only thing I didn't do often enough, and it's the only thing I can see now on the other side of it that would have changed the shape of everything. Marty called me last month just to check in. He said Helen and he had had a hard week, a real disagreement about something that mattered, and they'd talked it through and it had been uncomfortable, and now they were on the other side of it, and something between them was closer than it had been before. He said it with the particular satisfaction of someone who understands that friction isn't the opposite of love. It's what love looks like when it's actually working. I said, I understand that now. I didn't understand it for 40 years, but I understand it now. Tell me in the comments, what is one thing you haven't said to your partner that you know you should? Because I am 77 years old and I know what it costs to wait, and I don't want you to learn it the way I did.